Peace be upon you. Today I am interviewing Sam Gerrans. For those who don't know him, Brother Gerrans is the author of the monumental translation of the Quran, A Complete Revelation, in which he demonstrates that the Quran as a scripture, which can and should be understood on the basis of its own contents, a position which the main schools of Islam implicitly reject. His work demonstrates on the basis of the Quran alone that the religion of Islam is not organically derived from the Quran. That is, the Quran does not contain the blueprint of a religion called Islam, or any other religion for that matter. One of the most remarkable aspects of his presentation of the Quran is his identification of a single protocol for the overthrow of certain tyrannies of the past and its application in the context of the one we are currently living under. This is detailed in his book, The God Protocol. He has authored a further book, The Mysterious Letters of the Quran, A Complete Solution, in which he provides a solution to the enigmatic muqattat, or mysterious letters, that are found at the beginning of a number of chapters of the Quran. We have a lot of ground to cover, so let's begin in the name of God.
Peace, brother.
Peace be upon you, brother, and welcome.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
In brief, I'm 56 years old. I happen to live in Russia currently, where I've spent about 23 out of the last 30 years. I grew up in England, in rural England, in a place called Suffolk, which is, if you look at England and think of it as looking somewhat like a pregnant woman, then it's where the pregnancy is. It's part of the pregnant stomach part of England. I'm married. I have a degree in Russian language and literature, and I come from quite a large family, and I've lived abroad, as I say, I should think about half of my adult life. So in summary, I suppose those are the sort of key facts. I mean, in terms of work life, I have backgrounds in languages, also in public relations, which for my sins I worked in for a couple of years, and in media. So those are the bare bones of my resume.
Okay. So I had a kind of follow-up question to what you mentioned about, your personal life. I'm just curious, what was your religious life like? Like, what did you, as far as your faith, like, what were you believing, or you grew up in that environment before you came to the Quran?
Well, I think that I don't really accept the common understanding of what a religion is. I mean, the common understanding of what a religion is that you have these religions, as it were, Islam or Judaism or Christianity or whatever it is. And then you have, sort of the big world, as it were. It seems to me that pretty much everyone believes the same religion. And this, I suppose, if you want to call it something, is solipsistic materialism is what people actually believe, because what you believe is what you do. What people claim is another thing. So what I grew up in is I was aware growing up that I was in England of the 1970s, in a civilization that was essentially collapsing, and it was quite clear that things were turning to detritus very, very quickly, and you could see. I was fortunate enough to catch the last embers of what I would call decent English British society before it was sort of turned into this nothing mush, which is mainly what it is. I'm not saying there aren't decent people there still are, surprisingly, but I was aware of that. And so what I saw, just through various experiences, is I saw around me that happening. And so for me, religion, if you want to call it that, I suppose looking for actual ultimate purpose was some kind of bulwark against what I saw, which was a society which appeared to want to commit suicide to some extent, and which, I mean, we can get into it later if you want, but over the last 10-15 years quite clearly is committing suicide. There's no question about it. I mean, it's the only explanation which makes any sense. So I suppose I'm one of the primary driver of any human being, ultimately survival. And so I had absolutely no confidence in what I mean, governments or any of the sort of authority figures I saw around me growing up. It was quite clear to me by the time I was about 13 that they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't. It wasn't that they did and I didn't understand. They just don't know. That's the answer. So I had to find out for myself. I think that's the way I would present that, rather than it being, I was brought up in Christianity. I mean, culturally, I was. Culturally, I'm Church of England, and very glad to be so. I love British churches and so on, and you know, listening to various hymns, you know, it stirs the blood and all of that, and you know, goes back to I suppose ultimately my Celtic Anglo-Saxon roots or whatever it is. But is it doctrinally correct? Quite clearly, well, for me, it's not. But also, I could see that the church, as such, is just an arm of government. But I'm not just saying that's true of the British church. It seems to me to be how religions are used, and I think that that's been the way historically. So it took me a while to work all of that out, but that's the background. So I actually went to a school which was technically Church of England, and so you know, you just pick these things up culturally, like cultural Muslims will pick up stuff. They might claim to be Muslims or whatever, but they didn't go out of their way to learn anything, but you pick stuff up from the culture. So that was my cultural background, but very quickly I learned that that there wasn't a sort of off-the-rack solution to the questions that I had.
So I'm curious about this statement you use, that the bulwark of religion, that it's basically sort of the last bastion that you thought could stop the sort of the ongoing decay of your well, I guess the world civilization at this point.
Yeah.
How did you come across that idea? Was it something you internally knew, or after reading certain books that you felt that this is the final standard? Because religion, obviously, you know, it has a part in everyday life. It used to have a big part in people's lives back in the day, not so anymore. But you know, for me, I guess, from coming from a cultural Muslim background, I never thought about it in that sense, where religion is sort of a stopping force towards the progress that we see, the atheistic, materialistic progress. How did you come to that sort of correct conclusion, actually? But how did you come to that idea?
I don't know if at this point it's possible for me to unpick my reading from other thinking. It's all so kind of mixed up together. But and also because of what I've learned since, it's quite easy to ascribe some kind of logical process to the conclusions that I've come to. I don't know that would be completely fair. Certainly reading has been a part of it, but I think ultimately for me, and it speaks to what I mean about the difference between believers and not believers, is I mean, I can perhaps describe it by coming at it from a slightly different angle, which is, I don't hold much truck with these debates, for example, between atheists and non-atheists. It seems to me a bit like that. You know, that wrestling thing they do where the fix is in and everybody knows that it's a fix. It seems to me like that, and they're only really playing to their own audiences. If somebody says to me they don't believe in God, I believe them. I think they're telling me that. I have to assume that they're telling me the truth. I don't think mostly people go out of their way to lie on that one. I mean, some people do. Certainly some people say they believe, but they don't, and the Quran tells us as much. So those people certainly exist. But you know, if we're going to say, well, they're lying, well, that's not a very respectful way to get into the conversation, is it? The way I describe it to myself is those magic eye pictures. If you've seen those magic eye pictures, which consist of lots of little dots, and if you look at it in a certain way, you know, the sort of the Leaning Tower of Pisa, or, you know, Marilyn Monroe will sort of jump out at you. And I think that that's a very good analogy for what I'm talking about, because if you take people like Richard Dawkins' description of what belief in God is, and then he attacks it, well, I'm not talking about that, Richard. What you've described is no part of my process at all. That's a straw man argument. What the atheists will tell me is, I see dots. Dots are all there are. And I say to the atheist, yes, I agree with you. There are dots, aren't there? Yes, I see those dots too. But I also see, you know, the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
So I have a question about, you know, your previous answer that, it's something intrinsic, that a believer is a believer, and, you know, it's something intrinsic to you. And that was kind of the path you were on. You know, you don't really agree with the idea that religion is, you know, something that people are the word religion itself is kind of like it's not correct, because religion is just a sort of an institution, but we're talking about something like belief. We're talking about a faith.
Yeah, can I just jump and say I don't actually have anything against religion per se. I think that it is a sort of like when people used to go to the gym at school and you go through these various exercises. Is that better than no exercise? Certainly it is. But is there a one-to-one correlation between that and what I think of as being health? Then the answer to that is no, not necessarily, at least.
Okay, I understand. So what prompted your search for the straight path of God? Did you, at least I'll give you a sort of my background. You know, I grew up cultural Muslim, and I, from a young age, I was introduced to the Quran. I actually read the Quran and didn't really quite understand it, because those people who are cultural Muslims, they know that, you know, you learn Arabic and you read Arabic, and if you're not Arab, then you just read it. You don't really understand what it says. But you know, I always had a problem with the rituals and the rigid thinking of the religion of Islam. I never quite got that, and I thought that, you know, it should make sense. It shouldn't just be something that we're blindly imitating. So you know, that was my search for the truth. I was trying to find if this is what I've been taught is correct or not, and that led me to reading the Quran and, you know, accepting that this is God's book, not because I was taught that, but because it's something that cannot be created or written down by a man. That was, you know, how I came to it. So how did that go for you?
Well, I mean, for me, obviously coming from culturally a Church of England background, the scriptures are the King James Bible. I mean, I'm going back to the 1970s. I'm sure it's the Passion edition or something gushy and insane now. But back in relative sanity, that was the case. So I went sort of church shopping and stuff, and it seemed to me a different version of what I was seeing outside in the big religion, the big cult. But it was infused with a certain amount of, I suppose, longing for the past, and things were better in yesteryear, and all of that sort of thing. And also what I saw was the biggest sort of society. If people took their faith too far, they started calling them cults. And this made me very interested in cults, and I sort of remain interested in cults to this day. And what I've seen and have been, you know, I've been justified, I have to say, is that the larger society is the real cult. I mean, it's the main cult. I mean, we have liberals, you know, frothing at the mouth, supporting Nazis in Ukraine. I mean, there is no delusion that you can't convince these people of. None, absolutely none. And so that's really where I was with religion, kind of going back a bit, is that I think essentially religions are not intrinsically bad. That's not my position. I think that most people really, and this isn't, I'm not being nasty, it's just that my observation is that they're weak-minded sheep. That's just what I see. You know, if I look at the society that I've come from, which was supposed to be a sort of liberal democracy, they're now out of their minds. I mean, literally out of. This isn't name calling. They've lost the plot beyond comparison. I mean, and what I think is that those people would have been under Mao Zedong China. They would have been dyed in the wool, you know, red communists. Under Stalinist Russia, they would have been, you know, prodding people into the gulags. Under Nazi Germany, they would have been standing at the street, you know, hailing Hitler as he went past in his open-top Mercedes-Benz, because they are followers. And I've seen it. Because things are speeding up. Maybe normally they would have taken a long time. I saw those processes. I've seen people that I know and love have their positions completely moved. And they even use different words. Like every time I go home, it used to be called, in England, it's called the rubbish. You know, in America, the trash. Well, now they call it the recycling. I mean, that's just one very small example. But you go back then, you see they've had all these new downloads, and they use different language, and there's nothing you can't teach these people. And especially now where the kind of the weapons of propaganda are so powerful. So in a way, I mean, going back to somebody we've discussed before, our good friend René Guénon, I mean, his attachment to tradition would be, it's in a lot of ways it is justified. But to go to religion per se, it's the idea is that there is the main society, and then you've got these religions as little islands you can just choose to sort of become a marooned upon while you live in the big society. But in the past, in medieval times, whether it was in what was called Christendom or under the Islamic civilization or whatever, the religion was life. It was just life. And what I say is that we still have a religion which is just life, and it's this insanity. It's a materialism and kind of utilitarianism, which Jacques Ellul describes so well in his book on propaganda. That's what there is. So the choice, it's a false choice in my view. You've got this false main religion on the one hand, being this kind of materialistic. Basically, there is everywhere in the world believes the same things. They basically believe that they're born to be happy. They believe that history is unfolding in never-ending progress. These are things which are baked into the cake of things like transhumanism and all the rest of it. And YOLO, it sort of gets down to that level at some point. Whereas, to get back to your question, what I found is that it seems to me that all of this is essentially nonsense. They're different types of compromise with truth. And I think that people go shopping for it. They basically think, I want an off-the-rack opinion. This is going to be my opinion. This is what I'm going to believe. I think I would almost go back to somebody like Thoreau. Thoreau, in his book Walden, said, I went to the woods because I wanted to live deliberately, to suck the marrow out of life. And he goes on to say that he wanted to know it to be true. If it was true, he would believe it. But if it weren't true, he would know it not to be true. And so that was really my position. So for me, if God be not true, this isn't a crutch for me. I'm not afraid that there is no God. For me, God, the existence of God is a philosophical and unavoidable truth because of everything else. So I'm not really, it's not that I'm against religions per se, to get to your question. It's not necessarily that that's the case. It's just that I don't really consider them competent experts in the questions that I have because they're so compromised apart from anything else. And this is certainly true in the West. Anyway, I'm sorry, that was a long kind of answer, but I did engage with Christianity, and I'm glad that I did, because I'm not saying all Christianity is wrong or nonsense, or that it's completely not acceptable. That's not my position. But I saw a lot of people who seemed to think that God required them to delude themselves, that was the price, that they were doing him a favor by pretending that something which quite evidently is not true is true. And I'm not talking about setting up science as the arbiter over religion. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about textual inconsistencies. I'm talking about the apostle, so-called Paul, who's arguing for most of the New Testament against Jesus. And this isn't a conspiracy theory. This is known. This is what people who engage in high apologetics of Christianity, they know this. It's only the rank and file who don't know this. But I could see this. So on a sort of doctrinal basis, if we're going to go and get into the weeds of the sort of the words of it, from my own culture and what my own culture could present me with, it was unable to answer a very simple question. And that simple question is to do with faith and works. So the whole point of Christianity, if we're going to get into the sort of doctrinal aspect of it, the argument of Christianity is that Jesus somehow absolves you of everything if you assent to some historical facts about him. So if you accept, yes, that Jesus was born of a virgin and died and was raised the third day, and that somehow is a propitiation for anything you may have done in the past, and it's a bit vague on the details, but may do in the future depending on certain other things. Okay, all right, but that's that's then that means that you can go ahead and do whatever you want. I mean, that is the ultimate, gotcha on this one. And so what I realized is that what they have is, but they say, no, you should be so grateful. You should be so grateful that Jesus did this amazing thing for you, even though you weren't born then, and you didn't ask him to do it, and you didn't witness it. And actually, we don't have any real proof that it happened, except for very contradictory accounts that this thing happened. But this amazing thing is, the thing. And then you read the New Testament and you look at Paul, and Paul's kind of trying to glue Jesus to the Old Testament. But when you actually, if you just do this one thing, if you're from a Christian background and you read Paul and just look actually in the Old Testament, don't just take his quotes. Go in the Old Testament and read his quotes in context. You'll find he misquotes the Old Testament all over the place. So in short, what you have is a man who himself says he is a prophet sent to the house of Israel. Jesus actually says this in the Gospels, but who says some other things which sound very Gnostic to me, but then are interpreted by Christians to mean that he's actually saying that he's the Son of God. The Son of God in John. He's the Son of God. Well, he doesn't mention it in Matthew, Mark, or Luke. Well, that's a big miss, if you ask me. I mean, it's not like he says you should put your left sandal on before your right sandal. No, being the Son of God, if what we mean by that is what Christians mean by that, to omit that piece of information, I think is malfeasance. I mean, you should mention it. In fact, it should be one of the first things that you say. That should be, "Hi, I'm Jesus, Son of God, here's my business card." Okay, we got it. Now we've established who we're talking to. So anyway, I mean, I don't want to kind of mock it, but you end up with this rather convoluted, let's put it that way, situation. And whilst reading the Bible, I'm certain there is scripture in the Bible. There's no question about it. It seems to me to be what it actually is. I mean, a part of our problem, I think, in short, is that it's all in between two covers. If it was different scriptures on different scrolls, we would have a different engagement with this library of stuff. But because we buy it, and we buy it neatly sliced between two pieces of, high quality leather, if you're fortunate enough to be able to afford one, it seems as though God sort of published this book and down it came from the heavens. But that isn't what happened. I mean, even Christians don't pretend that that's what happened. But in fact, they do kind of pretend that that's what happened ultimately. That ultimately, that's what God was doing. He was ultimately writing this one book, the King James Bible. And now I got the King James Bible. That's it. Now everything goes out the world. So anyway, that's a bit of a long answer. But what I came to a point of frustration with it. Because it seemed, and this is something that you and I have talked off air about, which is a constant. It is a constant, especially in the West, is the price of admission is complete capitulation. That's how it works with these people. They do it with Russia. They do it with everything. They do it when they're talking about, inclusion, identity, and all the rest of it. The price of debating with them, the price of the conversation, is for you to accede to all of their assertions going in before any negotiation happens. And this is kind of what it is with Christianity. And you find yourself, or my experience of it, and you kind of find yourself, the price of either you accept something which is not acceptable, or you're not a believer. Well, I say that's a false dichotomy. And so that really gets to the heart of what I'm trying to talk about. This isn't me setting up a new religion, or it's not about I just have, these feelings which don't comport with discipline or an order. I'm all in favor of discipline and order. It's that their arguments don't make sense to me, but that doesn't make me an unbeliever. I do believe in God because I'm built that way, going back to other conversations we've had. So that was my experience in it. I'm afraid that's a long answer, but there you go.
I mean, you bring up an important point, that this sort of this argument that that this is the full stack, if you will, of the articles of faith that you need before we can go further. And that's something, with the religion of Islam as well, that they have this, assumptions that if you actually look in the Quran, you find that they are not present in this foundational scripture that the Muslims claim to be the source of the religion. But you have to accept those before they even consider you a Muslim, which, you know,
Sure.
That is their understanding of it, which is not true according to Quran.
Sure. And sorry, and just to jump in there, this is gaslighting. I mean, this is almost the kind of typical definition of gaslighting. We insist that you accept our conclusions before we're willing to talk with you, and they all do it. All of these things do it. The big matrix cult does it with its green hair and delusion and sexual perversions. Religions do it. They're all doing essentially the same sort of thing. So that's really gets to the heart of what I was trying to say. Is I realize there is no difference between these. Any idea that there's a real contrast between the religions of Islam, I'm talking in a sort of brand sense, and of Christianity, and of the delusional libtard, you know, materialistic religion, and any apparent contradictions between them are just surface level. In terms of mechanics, they operate at pretty much the same.
Yeah. I think that's sort of the in your work that this was, to me, when I read it the first time, I was very, if I want to use the word, shocked, because I never really thought about it in that sense, where if you look under the surface, they all have the same DNA, but it's just, you know, Coke versus Pepsi sort of thing, you know? Absolutely.
It's really branding. It comes down to branding, because they're all part of the same essential religion. They accept, and especially now, where, especially with Christianity, I'm not so sure about Islam, but where money is such a huge part of it, they're businesses. They've got markets. They're out there to sell.
True. Now, since you had already worked out that, you know, religions are cults, and then there's the big cult, that's the Matrix cult.
Sure.
I'm curious, why did you read the Quran? Like, what was your impetus to read the Quran when you understood that the Islamic religion is you know, it's presenting some things that are not true, and it's the same with Christianity. They're all the same. So why go and look in the Quran to see if you could find any answers?
I didn't look in it to see if I could find any answers exactly. I've always been a reader, and looking back, I remember, you know, it's the things that you remember which really tell you who you are, because different people could have the same experiences and they just wash over them. But I remember a couple of things. I was outside of the UK when this whole, you know, hating Muslims or cultural Muslims and all of that started. I was literally out of it, so I missed all of that. I completely just missed it, and that was one thing. But the other thing is, when I was about 17 or 18, I remember I was working somewhere, and it came over the radio that the Americans had just attempted to murder Gaddafi. This is the first time. This is back in the 1980s, I guess. And, you know, you have those dulcet BBC tones just informing you that the British and the Americans have worked together. They're partnered in an outward-reaching venture to murder the head of a foreign country in his bed, and missing him but killing one of his daughters and some other people. And I just stopped. I thought, what? And they're the bad guys? And I remember thinking, I didn't know anything about Libya, especially, but I knew that they were Arabs, and I knew that Arabs held to the Quran. And I remember then, I was young, as I say, making a mental note, even though I was very much in the sort of Christian milieu at that time, thinking, one day I'm going to read that book. I just made a mental note. I'm going to find out what that book says that those people read. So that was just, you know, one little node. The other things, I suppose, is that what do we know is from a Christian milieu about Muslims? And I'm not talking about now, because everything's become so politicized and insane. I'm talking back in relative sanity, which is the 1970s. And the only thing that I could say that I really knew was that the saying about, and I've never heard Muslims saying, but I've heard Christians say it, which is, if Muhammad won't go to the mountain, then the mountain must come to Muhammad. I don't know where it's from, but I picked that up from somewhere. So I sort of kind of picking these bits and pieces up. And after my experience with Christianity and so on, I put everything on the back burner, and I decided to go to university and study something I was interested in. And I remember thinking, I can't read scripture at the moment because I just become glutted with it, and I just decided as an active decision not to read anything. And I thought about things, and I thought, I'm going to think about God until I have a sentence that makes sense to me. And when I was going to university, I used to think about this on the bus, and eventually, sometimes I try to pare down something to its essentials. And the essentials for me is, or that made sense at the time, is that God is the mind behind the universe. And to put it into modern terms, the operating system, if you want to call it that. This made much more sense to me than what I'd been, a lot of what I've been told, and the sort of, especially the happy clappy sort of side of Christianity, never really did it for me at all. I find it brings out a violent streak in me, which I'm not particularly proud. Anyway, to answer your question, I was walking down the street in Kilburn, North London, one day, and I walked past an Islamic bookshop, and I just went in, and I got into a chat with the guy there, and he impressed me, not because of his astounding intellect or anything like that, no, but he impressed me because he didn't try to impress me. I liked that about him. He really apparently couldn't care less. And he didn't like it. I talked about Mohammedans, because that was the term that and that really hit a nerve with him. He didn't like it. No, we are Muslims. I thought, okay, I think there's something, this is a sensitive area here, and I can see why, in the light of what I now know. But to be fair to him, I like the fact he didn't try to sort of glad hand me. He didn't try to kind of work me over in the way that, Jehovah's Witnesses might do, or whoever it is. He appeared really not to care, and I thought, good for you. I like that. I'm much happier with that than I am with this sickly sweet saccharine nonsense. Anyway, he gave me a copy of the Quran, and I didn't read it. I didn't read it for a couple of years. I knew I couldn't read it. It was Abdul Yusuf Ali's translation, and I left it at one of my sisters in London, went back to Russia, which is kind of where I lived in Russia, went to live in Russia. Anyway, a couple of years later, after I'd kind of worked a lot of these things out, I remember coming across certain questions and thinking, next time I'm in the UK, I'm going to pick that up. And I did. And I read it when I was about 27 or 28. And I can't say that it all made sense, or that there was this, Alhamdulillah, brother, this is what I've been looking for. No, it wasn't like that for me. It wasn't like that. But what it was like for me is I could see certain things, and what I got was an answer to my question about the difference, or the relationship of faith to works, and you get it really early on. Page 2 of Al-Baqarah, there you have it. Whoso believes in God and the last day has his reward. And okay, whoso believes in God and the last day and does good works, he has his reward. So it is both. It is both. And I just, that impressed me. That impressed me, and some other things impressed me. For example, to do with marriage. I mean, living in a society which is in collapse, and which demonizes men and steals all their stuff, it was very interesting that something so important to contain women, I've got nothing against women, but they are very devious and intelligent men do not have a difficult time leveraging women to destroy society. I think we can agree on that much. We're living through it right now. So it was interesting to me to see that the Quran contained the hudud Allah, the barriers, the kind of the limits. And it was quite clear to me that this was a book where it wasn't prescriptive in every single case. You must brush your teeth like this, despite what Muslims think. But in fact, the opposite is true, and it says, are you going to, ask your prophet in the same way as Moses was asked? What it does is it lays down the banks of a river in which you're expected to make a boat and start sailing. but it doesn't prescribe a step-by-step detail, and that was impressive. And quite clearly that was the case. It seemed to allow, it does allow, for the broad gamut, the gamut of human talents and abilities. And after reading it, I thought, you know what, I'm going to read it again. So I read it immediately through again, slowly, actually out loud. And I could also feel that occasionally you'd be reading, and you get to this bit, and I'm not criticizing Abdul Yusuf Ali here, but it's a fact in any translation. You get to, especially bits which are to do, which are the kind of the Muslim proof texts for their religion. You kind of go, you could feel, oh, this bit's not right. I just intuited that this, it's not that I didn't like it, it's nothing to do with liking it. I could just feel that there was something wrong with this. So, but anyway, long story short, after reading it, I thought anybody who follows this would have an amazing civilization. Why aren't the Muslims the number one in the world? Well, then I met Muslims, so then quite clearly I discovered the answer to that, because they're just following stuff that was very similar actually to what I'd seen in Christianity. And that's why I'm glad that I had that experience in Christianity, because any cults or once you've seen one, they're all the same. So if anybody's been the Jehovah's Witness, my suggestion would be go and read up on the Mormons. Not because reading about Jehovah's Witness is going to be too close for you. You'll find that they're all the same. But having been, in Christianity, I saw that, Muslims were, it's not exactly the same, but there were lots of points of comparison. And having seen it, I thought, I've come too far. I'm not going to sign up for this. This doesn't make sense to me. So anyway, that's what happened. I read it. I read it again. I was very careful with it. But also, as they say, once bitten, twice shy. So I was very clear, and I just sort of backtracking a bit when I was working on my own definition of God. I made a pact with myself, which was because I felt somewhat sheepish and ashamed after being tricked by Christianity, and I made a deal with myself. I am never going to allow anything past the kind of the gates of my own mind that doesn't make sense to me. I'm never going to find myself ever on the wrong side of this line again, and that's that. I've held to that. I can say that I've been true to that. So in fact I can't give you chapter and verse, but certainly we find verses in the Quran which talk about people who fall away, but actually God can use that. He can guide that. Anyway, that was my experience. So I did read the Quran, but I had a lot of questions, and it wasn't, I can't provide some sort of, and the heavens opened and I realized that, Western civilization had been wrong in every single thing that it's always done. No, that wasn't the case. And what it meant was that I then got a quick education in realizing why Islam is in the state it's in. That's what actually happened. But I read the Quran, and then I realized I'd have to do some work for myself. So that's where I ended up with it. But that's the answer. So
for me, as a cultural Muslim, when I read the Quran, I think I was in my mid-20s, and I also read Abdullah Yusuf Ali. He's one of the most popular translators. At least he used to be at that time. But what struck me was in the beginning, in chapter 2, it talks about the Jews or the children of Israel. I kind of use the same manner, but obviously there's a difference. But anyway, what it talks about is that they made the claim that the fire will only touch us for a few days. As soon as I read it, this sort of like ding ding went in my head, and I thought, wait a minute, this is what Muslims believe too. And that really kind of, I guess, sharpened my my spidey sense, if you will, and I started to look into the Quran, with this fresh perspective that it's actually criticizing the people who hold on to it. And for me, that was sort of the aha moment where I just thought I'd grab something that was truly remarkable, because it's actually criticizing the people who lay the claim that they are following it. You would think that that it would confirm what they're doing, but it actually wasn't confirming what they were doing. And to me, that was the beauty of the Quran, is that these people were they make the claim that they preserved it, when actually we read in the Quran that it's God who preserves it. But nevertheless, they had this time with the Quran, centuries, and they were unable to change the Quran to their whims and desires.
Sure.
That really impressed me as, sort of the proof that this is a revelation from God that is protected. What did you talk about when you read the Quran, and there were things in there that appealed to your reason, and you felt, okay, yeah, this makes sense, because how the hududullah is, it gives you that flexibility. It gives you because man is called as the viceroy, he is the viceroy and the khalifa, so he is allowed to make decisions on his own, obviously with the understanding that he will have to answer to God in one day. What was it in the Quran, sort of like that was the aha moment for you, that for you it completely changed your perspective about this text, that this is proof from God, this is the real thing, if you will?
I think there's, I can't point to one thing, but there are accumulations of them. What I did ultimately, I suppose, for what I'm best known for, is my work with the Quran, which I'm not here to push books or anything. My work is all available for free, so you can just download it or access it from QUR'AN.com. But for me, it was a matter of due diligence, and it's so. I think that iterative readings, you acquire a kind of a facility for something over a process of acquaintance. So reading the Quran over time it gave me enough to motivate me to do full due diligence on it. So that was really, as a process of that, I now have my answers. I'm not saying that I'm not continuously learning, because I am. I remain a student of this book, but it repays the man who goes to it in the terms that it sort of sets out. And this isn't assuming a religion called Islam of a particular madhab or particular, whatever it is. It's coming to it and applying all of the skills and abilities and experiences that you've got to this book. I found that to be, I feel very privileged, actually, that I've had this, that I found this. So that's part of it. But I can give you some part of my process. I realized that what it really boils down to, and I looked as well at what you might call Quranists sort of stuff, and it really just boiled down to me. There just seemed to me that there wasn't really a methodology. I mean, obviously you'll get the 19ers and people who are obsessed with numbers and stuff. I don't have an issue with it. I don't honestly really understand it. I don't see any point to it, but that's me. I'm not a mathematician. It doesn't do it for me. But where they're right is there has to be a methodology, some sort of way of working with this text. And I thought that, I can give you some key points. One point was when I read a lot, but I read a lot of, there isn't a huge rhyme or reason. I read things way out of my field. I read a summary of the work of a chap called Bedřich Hrozný, who was where was he from? Czech. He was a Czech linguist who was given the unenviable task of translating the Hittite libraries into European language at the beginning of the 20th century. And the reason why I mention this is because of these what I call sore thumb words in reading the Quran, because I had loads of questions. I had enough to know that this was worth spending the time on, and it has ultimately been my life's work. But I had questions, and what Muslims claimed this book meant was pretty high up my list of questions. So, because essentially it works is, we have these words, salat and zakah and this, that and the other, but yeah, you're right, there's no definition in the Quran, but that's why you need the hadith, but this is why we need to follow some guy who's got a long beard. Okay, fine, that's your answer, that's fine. But to me, it's no different than saying we have to follow, Tony Blair because he says bomb Iraq. There is no difference. There isn't any objective reality to any of it. It's just you're weak, you follow somebody who's strong. Okay, fine. That's how things have been for millennia. But I actually want to know what this book means. And if you don't know, and you can't tell me, then I'm going to find out for myself. Until I get to a point where I realize, you know what, this book isn't from God. In which case, I'm going to the pub because I've got other things to do with my time. Okay, if we get to that point, fine. But if it is from God, then I think I really do owe it, due diligence. So anyway, going back to Grozny, he was given this task of working out what the entire Hittite library meant. Now, he was a very clever man, and he was a very skilled linguist. And what he realized was, I don't know how he got to this, I just thought it was brilliant. He realized, well, the Hittites are an agrarian society. So whatever word occurs the most often in this huge body of text nobody can read a single word of must mean bread or grain. Okay? I mean...
Just like money today.
Ah, what a mind. There you are. Yeah, exactly. If you've been in American literature, you'd have been dollar or whatever it was. So there you are. And he did that. He must have been fascinating. He spent, I don't know how long, going through this huge library. This is he wasn't able to put it in an Excel spreadsheet like I did. He had to do this by hand. Anyway, he did it, and this presented him with something of a Rosetta Stone that he could then use to apply what he already knew. And now, if you have a mind, you can read, these Hittite libraries in translation. I thought, that's really clever. I'm taking that. And so I took that, and what I realized was in lots of ways, my task is infinitely easier because we know what most of these words mean. And also the Quran is a complete data set. And also it claims to be from God. It claims to be perfect. It claims to be susceptible to reason. It claims all these things. Well, let's test those claims. Are they true? If they're not true, let's go to the pub. If they are true, well, that means that we have some other things which we're obliged to do. There is an obligation implicit in this. So that process of what I call pan-textual analysis of going through every single, and also because of the way Arabic works, the roots, the mechanics of Arabic. I mean, I often describe it. It means that you're at an advantage in a way that you might not be in the English language, although there are some points of correlation. And the example that I give is if we accept hosp as a root, then we have hospital, hospice, hospitality, and all these sorts of things. But if somebody says, well, hospitate means to give us 2.5% of your income every year, okay, then you know what, I can look at these other words and what they mean and come to some reasonable decision that actually, especially if your entire definitions are coming from a different literature in the context of a book which says that it's from God and complete. Now, if it is complete, then your definitions are not required. And if it's not complete, then it's not from God, because God claims it is complete. Which is it? And all I did was hold the feet of this logic to the fire. And that's been my process. So in process of all of this, I have come to understand this book to be from God. I stake my life on it. I stake my death on it. Now, does that mean that I haven't come to points where I think, and I have many, I think, there you are, that's it. It's, see, that can't be true. I've been through this, I don't know how many times. And you stick at it and you dig and you dig and you dig and you find, you go, oh, wow. Yeah, I've had this experience. This isn't most of my experience. Most of my experience is like Grozny, sitting there counting his way through words. Most of it's very methodology. It's a lot of it's all method driven, and some of it's tedious, like you wouldn't believe. But there are moments, and you get to those moments. I actually, just on a slight tangent, I describe what I do. I think the best description of it is as an archaeologist. I'm basically a textual archaeologist. I treat this book as I would had I found it buried in a cave somewhere, without all of the 1400 years of Muslims saying this and doing that and all the rest of it. How would I treat this book, on that basis? And that's how I've treated it. And I've been fortunate to learn from lots of other people, to live at a time when computers, they don't do your thinking for you, but they can speed up certain processes. And, you know, it means that my own translation, my own work, I was able to traverse the entire text of the Quran based on roots and words, you know, in 20 seconds, looking for, you know, all of the, if we're talking about salat, you know, it's got 92 root words. I can get through that in a couple of minutes. You can imagine how long that would have taken, you know, Bidrek Hroznik, with the best will in the world, that, you know, he would have taken him several days. So it's, I've been the beneficiary of a lot of other things going on around me. So to answer your question, I've come up against walls, but what I've done is basically applied what the Quran says, which is, you know, it appeals to you to use reason. It doesn't say, now go and follow this other stuff. It doesn't say that. In fact, it pulls you back. It keeps pointing back to itself. And I'd seen, again, going back to the Christianity thing, I'd seen it before, where you start off with Jesus, who's a prophet to the children of Israel, and you keep reading, and, you know, 30 pages down, you're now in the weeds of Paul, who says, you know, I'm preaching this other Jesus, this completely different Jesus. In the context of which, when if you look at back at Jesus, Jesus tells you, he says, many shall come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and shall deceive many. And he gives a whole description of precisely the people you shouldn't believe. And amongst them, he says, if they say he's in the desert, believe it not. Go not forth. Or he's in secret chambers, don't believe it. So he gives this whole outline of scenarios in which you're not to believe somebody who says and talks about Jesus. These precisely agree with Paul. And he even talks about Paul, and he even says, you know, whoever does this shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. Well, least is what Paul means. The Roman name Paul means small, least, little. That's what it means. And so he's telling you exactly, don't trust this guy. And yet we have so I'd seen this one. So when I came to the Quran and I saw Muslims doing what seemed to me, it was not exactly the same thing, but the same thing. I've already seen that, and you know, for me it was like, okay, human nature, there it goes. But I'm going to stick with this book. So that was sort of my process.
So, you know, we talked a little bit about your methodology, which you called the pan-textual analysis.
Sure.
And I'm just curious. So, you know, as someone who understood that the Quran is preserved and is complete and fully detailed, obviously I was also looking for the answers to some questions that Muslims would always throw around, that, you know, where is the salat, how to do the salat in the Quran, or, you know, the zakat, the 2.5%, that's not, the figure's not there, so that's why you need the hadith. And you mentioned that this is sort of like the game that's played.
Sure.
And so when I looked in, you know, for answers, I guess when I read your work, this was one of the remarkable insights, is that you came on the scene and you said, which is correct, that the Muslims have grafted this religion of Islam onto the Quran, and that this was, first of all, this was not an accident. They were brilliant minds who were put to the task of diverting the Quran's you know, message, and the Quran's the words have been twisted.
Sure.
And you know, obviously, as a student of the Quran, we read that the Quran talks about the people to whom the scriptures were sent earlier, how they were twisting the words from their places. They were perverting the meanings as well. So it's kind of the same modus operandi with the Muslims, where they were taking these words and they're twisting them to mean salat, to mean a ritual prayer, when if you look in the Quran, it's like you said, it's a generic, it just means duty. It's an abstract term.
It has to be it has to be an abstract term. There's no way that it cannot be. And the example I would use is patience. You know, I don't want to get into sort of like Arabic, kind of the weeds of Arabic, but wasta'inu bis-sabr was-salat, and make use of sabr as-sabra. It's got the definite article, okay, because they use this definite article thing, which means something different. They're playing this game of, that Find the Lady. You see these guys on London Bridge, like hiding a pea underneath it. This is bait and switch. But anyway, they say you've got one verb, which is taking two objects. One is sabr and one is salat. Now, I have yet to meet a traditionalist, dyed-in-the-wool hadithist kind of Muslim who will say, well, how do you have patience, brother? How do you have patience? Where's the hadith which explains how to have patience? Well, because we all know how to have patience. It depends on what's going on in the environment. It depends if you're running a marathon. Well, then, you keep going. That's having patience, having fortitude. If you're giving birth to a child, well, then it's a different type. We all know this is common sense. It's not possible. It isn't possible for salat to mean what they say, because what they're actually doing is they're making it almost into they're turning it into a noun, like the foxtrot being a type of dance, which has got moves, and we all know what this is. But patience is an abstract noun, like love, like honesty, these sorts of things. And what they're doing is they're trying to merge two different types. These are different linguistic stuff. So we can say absolutely that it cannot be this. They also play rather fast and loose with the idea of prayer, because what do we mean by prayer? But once you get down, and it's all very vague. But once you get down into what we're actually talking about, what they're actually talking about is something which is comparable to the foxtrot. It's a set of moves performed in a very particular way. Now, I don't mind if people want to do that. Fine, I couldn't care less. But is it this thing? No, it can't be. I think it's a very difficult word, but I think it's much closer to dharma. It's that holds in all cases. And also we know that the God is something that God has. He's, with relation to the prophet, he fulfills his duty to the prophet too. So,
sure. and it's a lot.
Yes, absolutely. So, what one finds is that there's a natural correlation between a glove and a hand, which doesn't exist between the same glove and a foot. If something fits, it just fits. But if something doesn't fit, you have to try to squeeze it on, like the ugly sisters in Cinderella. And what you find with I don't mean to be rude. I'm sorry if it comes across that way, but I just, we're talking a lot, and we don't want to impose upon our listeners, patience too much. I'll just kind of cut to the chase of it all, which is that essentially, we've got the ugly sister sitting there trying to squeeze a glass slipper onto their foot, and it just won't go, and it won't go. And what you find is that what they require, same as with the Christianity thing, is they require you to be very vague about what you're actually talking about. And then it kind of seems to work a little bit. But I ask you, we're talking about your eternal soul here, and I'm not saying that there aren't decent Muslims. I know that there are, because I've met some, so I know that. But when I look at a lot of these mullahs who kind of set themselves up as the arbiters of everything, I would not buy a second-hand car from these men. Okay, I wouldn't. And I'm not going to mention any names, but I would not. But that's me. I have to answer for myself now and on the day of judgment. I am not going to outsource my mind, my soul to these men. Not ever. Now, if, let's say, after having done 20 years of work and all the rest of it, let's say on the day of judgment, there I am. I was wrong. I should have listened to some guy who has actually no saleable skills in the world whatsoever, and just accepted that these stories which he says are true and are outside of the Quran really are the arbiter of this book that says that it's from God and complete. Let's just pretend that that's all true. Well, then I'll take my medicine on that basis on that day. But I'm not, as going back to the kind of the pact I made with myself post Christianity, I am not going to allow myself to be railroaded by these. Even if they were more impressive, I still wouldn't. I still have a duty to myself to do it. And that's really what I'm saying, is that one has a duty to do due diligence. The Quran says, will they not consider the Quran with care? Are there locks on their hearts? And so I have to give an account for myself. And that's what I'm doing. And so the argument, what I found with lots of Muslims or cultural Muslims is they kind of, what they do is they cite, sort of some nebulous authorities that they don't really know anything about, but they don't know themselves, but these other men do. They're the experts. Well, I look at it, well, what's the result of this expertise? What has this resulted in? And what I see is the Islamic community, the so-called Islamic community, superior in any obvious ways to the society around it? I don't think so. Secondly, what I see is somebody who's culturally and racially British, is that tons of Muslims have come to my country and they can't wait to embrace everything that my country's got. They can't, they're 5 minutes, running around after what our women and this, that, and the other. I don't see that they're morally. What I see is that they like things like polygamy. Oh yes, brother. Well, the law. Yes. But this guy's got 4 wives living on the British dole, being paid for by the British taxpayer, and this is because he's following the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's nonsense. It's just foolishness. Excuse me, but so what I've decided to do is not engage in it. I just understand this book. People will do what they do. People find their own levels, and that's one thing I've learned about life. So I don't know. I'm kind of sort of rambling a bit, but I'm trying to hit these points as they come up.
No, that's good, because some of the questions you're answering, because they're kind of related, and so you're hitting some points. Now, I want to talk a little bit about your translation, because there are other translations out there. There's been a lot of work done as far as some good translations. We have Arbery's translation, which is very literal, very good. And
I agree.
Obviously, you've read Abdullah Yusuf Ali's translation, which is decent. And there's other translations, and there's translators who are working on translating the Quran. I mean, it's not something that's finished. But your key discovery was the pan-textual analysis, which you brought to bear on your translation. You also did something interesting where you accepted the Quran's definition of key terms.
Sure.
So I wanted you to talk a little bit about that, and also other things that you think that were missed by other translators that you were able to pull out from the Quran. Because what you're doing really is you're challenging the religion of Islam, who claims the monopoly rights on the Quran, and that it's being derived from it. Whereas you're saying, look, the Quran as a standalone scripture, no need of any extraneous or outside literature. And the Quran itself is claiming this. It's not that I'm doing this, but the translation is the proof text for this claim.
Yes. If the Quran is not complete and sufficient, then their whole edifice collapses, because the book they claim is their foundational scripture says that it is. It's very simple. It's not complicated. If the Quran is not sufficient to the business of serving God, then the whole religion is false.
Could you repeat that or elaborate a little bit for the heart of thinking? Because I think this is an excellent point.
Well, it's okay. The Quran is claimed to be the edifice upon which the religion of Islam is built. I would argue that it's not even really, truthfully, the wallpaper of that edifice. What they do is they sing it and they stroke it and they talk about it, but when it comes to actual reality, they don't see that they follow it. Now, this isn't just a matter of my interpretation versus their interpretation. I challenge anybody, if you're interested, to go to your local mosque and talk about the Quran alone. I don't mean as a philosophy, I mean just only using the Quran as a text to argue any points that you might be making. I would be surprised if you last an hour without being physically ejected. If whenever there's a counter argument or a counterpoint made which comes from anything other than the Quran, if you go back to the Quran and just keep hammering on what it says, you'll find that they will remove you physically from their presence. That should tell you everything that you want to know. And again, this isn't unusual. I'm not picking on Muslims. I saw something quite similar. Try going into a church and sticking to the words of Jesus and not the words of Paul. See how long you last. It won't be very long, I can promise you. So this isn't a fault in Muslims, like particularly. This is a human thing. and the Quran talks to us. It says about this, when the Quran alone is mentioned, then you see the reaction. But to go back to your point about Quranic definitions, again, I have a background in language, so perhaps if you have, it makes you think about words in a particular way. Words have meanings. They have meanings. And also, I've used this example in my work, but living in the West, which is being sort of frog marched over the cliff of corporate delusions, words have their meanings changed. I'm old enough to remember when gay meant blithe, happy, and merry. That's what it meant. That is what it meant. You can hear the songs from the late 1960s, early 1970s, which used the word. That word was changed as a matter of policy, and now everybody uses it to mean a sodomite. There you are. That's not a minor change. That's not some sort of small matter of some sort of minor residual hue being changed. No, this is a major change. So it's quite clear that the Quran was, I think, unassailable. And so what happened was that, I don't sort of focus on this, but it's quite clear to me that the intelligent minds, and I've been around some really, really smart people in my life, and I've seen how mechanisms like this work. How do you attack something? Well, what do you do? The way to manipulate people is to leverage their existing assumptions, and so that's what you do. You do it in the West. We have it. The West is really a sort of, I suppose, a sort of backslidden form of Protestantism, and what they need is to feel righteous. They need it, and so the whole indoctrination leverages that. So they're schooling their children into the wonders of sodomy because they're so righteous. It's called virtue signaling. So this isn't complicated stuff. Human nature is quite straightforward in these ways, and there's an equivalence with the Islamic world. In fact, I've argued in other places, I don't do so much anymore, but it's a fact that I think that's the reason why the rulers in the West imported Islamic culture wholesale into the West. It's because they're so similar. They're both deluded in very similar ways. This is an obvious match. Mm-hmm. But to go back to your point about your question about definitions, the Quran is very clear. You'll say, for example, and such and such and such and such, and they do this and this and this and this, and these are the whoever it is, the losers, mm-hmm. or the unbelievers, or the whoever it is. You think this is a working definition, and you can piece together. Those are as definitions. So the unbeliever, if you want to use it, el-kafirun, or whatever it is, the Islamist religion is, it's anyone who doesn't believe in the holy religion of al-Islam, Sure. Well, okay, but that isn't what the Quran says. You're arguing against what you end up with. This ridiculous situation is, in order to defend their religion, they actually have to detonate the thing they say this religion stands upon. That's it.
That's how it works. Yes. Because the book itself, the Quran, it decimates all the assumptions of the Muslims that the rituals and the practices and the sort of thinking that they have. It's not really based on the Quran. It's actually based on a separate literature which are called the Hadith. Also, I think it's important that people realize that your work is based on the Quran alone itself. It's using the Quran as the reference. It's self-referencing, right?
Sure.
And so other translators, their work is usually based on the Hadith literature.
Well, it's based on the fact that they want to be able to get their car out the garage without having to check under it each time they go to the shops. It's it depends. It depends who they are. There are different translators have different motivations. I have clearly I have my own motivations. But if you take, for example, A.J. Arbery translation. I mean, he was an Arabist, and I think a genuinely, decent chap. And I like his translation. I reference it, and I think it's of high value. If you take Abdul Yusuf Ali, he didn't have access to the Arabic, unfortunately, but what he tried to do was, I think, read other translations, and then sort of his contribution was to represent it in a kind of, I don't want to say mock, because that's not kind, but with a strong tip of the hat to King James English. He wanted to make it feel like a scripture. You have Hilal Khan's translation, which I take two opposite views. If you take, for example, Muhammad Assad, who's a Jewish convert to the religion of Islam, I think he was a very refined and intelligent man who presents these, rather erudite, almost Sufi-esque kind of presentations. So you have him on the one hand,
Sure.
and I reference his notes a lot in my notes because people need to have that for context. Even if I don't agree with him personally, it doesn't matter. What he says is relevant. And then you have on the other hand the Hilal Khan translation, which is this is the wide-eyed, suspicious backpack on the way to the railway station translation. If the Quran really truly meant what they say it does, my kind of engagement with it wouldn't have lasted very long.
I think with the translation of Hilali Khan and Sahih International, and I think there's a new one out called the Clear Quran that's being used a lot. A lot of these translations, what I didn't get was always their insistence on using brackets when they're translating, as if God is unable to communicate in a clear manner, so he needs the assistance of men. That really struck me as something that is to me is it's inexcusable that you would try to basically put words when those words are not used.
But they would argue that it's this sort of unrepeatable style of the Quran, which is just so amazing in Arabic. But it's these these barbaric languages like English and French and German, Spanish and Russian, and they're just not capable of attaining the heady heights of this this amazing language. Firstly, quite a lot of the Quran is in translation anyway, because not everybody who speaks in it spoke Arabic. That's the first thing. And you notice this too, of course, the Jews did this as well. Hebrew is the holy language, and it's the only language in which anything can be understood. And you get these people as well, Arabic, blah, blah, blah. Again, this is human. This is just how humans operate, I suppose. But also, I take it. I'm actually grateful to them for this, because it shows you what they're at least they're being clear on what they say they think it means, and they. I don't like to say the word expose themselves, because that's not quite how I'm going at this. But they declare their hand, and you can say, okay, well, here you are, here you are, here you are. I mean, I'd say that Sahih International is a good translation on quite a lot of. If anybody wants to read a middle of the road, reasonably sane, sort of Sunni translation, then I would say it's of a high quality. But what they do is they at least with all of these brackets, they state what they're saying that it means, and showing actually quite often that they don't understand it. We're not guessing. We've got their own evidence.
Now, the Quran claims to be protected from attempts to tamper with it. What are some of the practical ways you saw this mechanism being implemented by God?
Well, one, if you look at the things which are not there, they're interesting. As you've mentioned yourself, and I agree with you, although Muslims will claim that Baka means Makkah, it doesn't say Makkah, it says Baka. I mean, there is one case where it does say Makkah in a different context, but I think that would be something. So there's that. For me, I mean, you've got cases like, for example, I think it's the singular instances of day There are 365 of them, and there is 12 instances of month. You know, you've got things like that which are, you know, interesting, certainly. For me, the final proof of it is what I call the mysterious letters. But this isn't something. This is, you know, this requires study to understand. It's not everything can be explained on the back of a meme. You know, there are things that, you know, require study, even not even to kind of research them. I mean, actually just to follow somebody else's research. But for me, at the sort of the higher end of it, there is that, because it locks the whole thing into one thing, and but it's not something I can summarize in 5 seconds. But that would be certainly one part of it. Yeah, I think those would be, you know, my main points.
Now, obviously, this work was difficult, and that's would be saying that is a serious understatement. What hardships did you encounter while working on this project?
Well, everything's difficult. You know, serving Satan's difficult too. So I consider myself very blessed. I'll be honest. If I were to die today, you know, I can say what I don't have. Let's start with what was easy. What was easy is I'm 56 years old and I'm not suffering from a midlife crisis. I'm not sitting there thinking, oh man, I wish I'd done something different with my life. No, I'm very, very happy that I chose this. It's rewarded me greatly in terms of, you know, doing my due diligence, getting to the answers that I wanted. And I'll be honest, in my childhood, I always knew I would do something like this. This feels to me like it's not a hobby, it's a mission. So to find that, unfortunately, this sort of job is not something you're going to find advertised in the newspaper. You have to arrive at it through trial, error, and all these other things. But you know, if we're going to get into hardships, I suppose it's not hardships, it's trade-offs. Everything has a price. People who serve, you know, the satanic system, look at, you know, Ursula von der Leyen or Borrell, or, you know, whoever it is, what's he called, Bojo the Clown, or Sunak or Biden, or the, you know, the whole sort of the deep state front end, as it were. Where they hire all these mediocrities and, you know, give them all of these prizes. They pay a price. They pay a price for it. And also, just, you know, what I've seen in what's happening to society generally as it collapses, their prizes aren't worth anything. You know, if you think back and think, you know, the Nobel Prize, it used to be a really prestigious thing, or an Oscar. Now it just means you're a mediocrity with absolutely no conscience. That's kind of what it now, I mean, I'm not saying it only means that, but everything's becoming debased. So there's that. The other thing is, my constant companion is death, frankly. I just live with death, in the sense that I'm aware at all times that any life is fragile. So I don't assume a long, happy life. So there's that. But certainly, you know, you in the trade-off, and there is one, you have to pay a price. But you know, you everything has a price. And for me, I want the garden. I'm very, very clear. I had enough hell already. I've seen it, and I don't like it. It doesn't appeal to me. Some people like this. Some people don't ever want to die. It's amazing. They would quite happily live for 1,000 years. The Quran talks about these types of people. I wouldn't live for 1,000 years for any consideration. So because I believe in God in the last day. That's me. So, but in terms of, you know, I know in the terms of what you mean, I certainly said it. If you if you explain, not only claim, but actually demonstrate on the basis of evidence that really that what I call brand Islam is doesn't meet the claims that it says it makes, then it's going to impact your career. it is. If there's a choice between hiring you and some guy who's not likely to be receiving anonymous letter bombs in the mail, then I think that they'll probably go with the other guy, all other things being equal. So there's that. Death threats and so on. Yeah, I've got a bit of a flurry at the outset of all of that sort of thing. Accusations that, I'm a Mossad agent and whatever it is, who knows what it is. I thought, well, I'm not getting paid by these people. But anyway, you get those people, you do. Certainly there is an element of that. What was surprising to me is, my own family, you'd think that they would take an interest. Even if they don't agree, whatever. But no, they just basically, it's not happening. They're just sort of sticking their fingers in their ears, and I don't know. I don't think I'm much discussed at Christmas and Easter and New Year and that sort of thing. But it's a price to be paid, What's the alternative? The alternative is that I might seek to ingratiate myself or please people whom I don't basically respect. That's not much of an outcome. At the end of the day, I have my integrity, and I've stuck to what I set out to do. I have stuck to it. I have not compromised on that. And I just consider myself very blessed. It sounds a bit trite, but it is completely true. Certainly, it's not pleasant when one receives that, but you end up actually in a bit of, what happens is you end up in something, you actually start to disregard all of it, because it's quite schizophrenic. You'll get, die is, Mossad scum, we're coming after you and your family. And then the next one is, hey brother, you've really changed my life. You did it. Die scum. Hey, you've changed my life. Which is it? And in the end, you end up, all you can do is just zone out of all of it and just stick to your own thing. And I was very, very clear early on that I wasn't going to waste my time in debating societies. Lots of people will waste your time. There are millions of them out there. And so a lot of what I get is Sam Gerrans is rude. I sent Sam Gerrans my thoughts on, that the cup that the Pharaoh drank out of was made out of alabaster and plastic, and I have a theory on that. And I sent him my 47-page thesis, and he didn't respond. So people get a bit annoyed about that sort of thing. I get a lot of annoyance. Maybe some of it's justified, but I don't know. But hey bro, I need you to translate your 750,000 words of work into sober Croat by Tuesday for me. And then I didn't, amazingly respond. So you get quite a lot of hate on that. But ultimately you get hate anyway. Do you know what I mean? We're now, what's happened is that we live in a world of what I call micro fame, where everybody's a little tiny bit famous, just a smidgen of fame, and any amount of it brings along with it delusion. You attract to delusion like a magnet. And so what I've done is I have organized my inbox on that basis. And so I have folders for death threats and delusionals and psychological problems and people who actually are going to help, and or whatever it is. And so I kind of, at first, what's hard about anything like this is the beginning. But once you get used to patterns, I think if I'm good at anything else, it's basically pattern recognition. Is once you start seeing the same patterns over and over again, you become inured to it. And obviously you do lose friends, and people think, or people will, and this is very common, they'll judge you on a complete misapprehension of what it is you're actually doing. They have a factoid, because people can't, if you've noticed, people can't say they don't know anymore. I never hear anybody say they don't know. I don't know all kinds of things, but they apparently know everything. And so they've had, you know, a 6-word introduction from AI or whatever it is on, you know, Sam Gerrans and what it is he's done. That's it. They're done. Yeah, they've got you in a box. That's it. Finished. Okay, that's who cares? So my position on it is, on all of it is, let God sort them out. You know, if I'm wrong, God knows that, and you know, I'll stand on that basis on the day of judgment. But I'm not here to try to convince anybody else. I've turned into the guy who gave me the original Quran. I actually don't care. It sounds brutal, but ultimately God guides or he doesn't guide. I have no idea how it works. It's beyond anything I can even pretend to understand. Who knows? But that's where I am with it. So I put it all in the kind of in that box.
Obviously, the people you interacted with when you came out with this translation mostly were of the traditional stripe, Muslims. Were there other groups that you were hoping to reach, or they reached you?
Oh, they've reached me. No, I'm not hoping to reach anybody. I'd be much happier working in a monastery or university or something. But unfortunately, the times are what they are. University life is closed, I think, pretty much to anybody who wants to do actual research. No, I have had some. I found a group. There's a group who's very interested in numbers, the number 19 specifically, who seem to think that, I don't know. I don't have a beef with it. I don't see it as being particularly interesting myself. It's not my area, but I think they felt there was a natural synergy there that we ought to somehow get together and sing Kumbaya together. I don't get it. I don't have that feeling. I'm just doing my due diligence. I'm not saying they're all wrong. I don't know. I'm not a maths major. I have no idea. But from what I've seen, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But people get very emotional about it. Okay, get emotional. I don't care. It doesn't. For me, the Quran is about ultimately, this isn't a parlor game. This isn't just a game of, I've spotted another 19 or 27 or 14 and a half. It doesn't matter what it is. It's about faith and works. That's what it's about. I don't think that you're going to get a 19 prize on the Day of Judgment necessarily. It's, did you have faith and works? That's what the Quran is calling you to. So myself personally, I would rather be able to control myself from, telling a Russian driver what I think of him at the crossroads. I'd rather be able to, keep a lid on that than to, understand the intricacies of 19. That's me personally. And I think it's more important. I actually do think it's more important. So I'm not out to diss it, but I found a lot of people who have a lot of feelings about that. They assumed, I think also you get, there's another sort of bandwidth of people who they think that because you are able to articulate an argument against the traditionalists' use of hadith, therefore you're a relativist. All feelings are equally valid, and I feel this, and I feel whatever. No, that is not my position. I believe in a very firm basis of knowledge and reality. And then you get, of course, people now that they're entitled to their views. That's fine, and I don't push this on people. I mean, I explain it, but I'm not out here to proselytize. But you get a lot of people who just, they say, well, my feelings are worth what you've done. Well, or who are you to have an opinion? It's coming at a different angle. Well, I said, well, I've put 20,000 hours into this. I mean, literally, and this is 20,000 Sam Gerrans hours. This is not sitting there, getting distracted with the internet. I mean, I literally worked 18 hours a day for years. I mean, I hardly saw my daughter growing up. People don't. I'm not complaining, but there is a time overhead. Most of what I do is actually boring. It's a lot of it's very, very exact, and you have to really want to know to do it. So I really do know the things that I know. I really know, and I know that there are some things that I don't know, but I also know that I don't know those things, and I'm working for. But because somebody has read a Snapchat post or something, I don't know what it is, but and you'll find that they assume that their total ignorance on the subject is somehow there's an equivalence between that and what I've done. Well, there isn't. There just isn't. In the same way as I know nothing about how to fly an airplane, let's say. If we get on an aeroplane, I'm not going to be pretending to know. It's not a feelings thing. It's you either know how to manage, a Boeing 747, or you don't. And I don't. So, but you get those people. I mean, one has to understand as well that we're living in a time of civilizational delusion. I mean, people are, in the West particularly, but I think we can now apply the moniker of the West pretty much to most of the world. They're out of their minds. If you'd shown these people to somebody like even 100 years ago, they'd have said, "You're out of your mind." Well, they are. They're out of their minds, and I'm not trying to to solve that, but I also have to be quite clear about how much patience I'm going to have with it. So I test people. Basically, when people come, I get a lot of people. Hey bro, yeah, I want to fly into the United Nations, treading blazes of glory, and to warn the elites and do all this stuff. And I've just come across 5 seconds of one of your videos, and I'm here to. Well, okay, well, you want to help? Well, here's a really boring job that's going to take you 6 months. We'll talk. We will talk when. And they usually there are a couple of outstanding exceptions, but generally speaking, that's the last you'll ever see of them. That's what you do. So again, I'm almost becoming Sufistic. There's the story of the Americans who go to find these Sufi masters because they want to learn about the great art of Sufism, and the Sufis say, okay, and they just sit there and ignore them for a couple of days, and the Americans can't. Why are they not talking to us? Get on the plane and go home again. And the Sufis are sitting there going, didn't they realize we'd started? This is the discipline. So I'm just saying that because it's not that I'm against tradition or any of this. It's not that. But what I see, especially going back to, well, certainly with Christianity, what that's morphed into and what I call brand Islam, is they're actually parodies anyway. I mean, when you find the Muslims, they're talking about an understanding of in the 20th century. I bet even if you took like a Sunni Hadithist Sunni of the 10th or 11th century and sat them down with your favorite mullah of today, they'd beat each other's throats in 5 minutes. Their understanding of things is completely different. So sure. Anyway, so I just thought I'd make that point. But yeah, I do get that. But I also get people who have genuinely helped my work and without whose assistance I wouldn't be able to do this work, because I'm not, independently rich or any of these things. And frankly, I was considering just, okay, I've done enough now, I'll go and do something else. But I was, convinced to do further work, and I'm supported to do that. But if it stops, I'll go and do something else. It's not, I don't even see myself as being particularly interesting. I'm just, in a way, although it might sound counter to what I'm actually been talking a lot about, is I see myself as following in a tradition. And I think that the kind of work that I'm doing has probably in some ways been done by other men before. That's how I see myself. I'm more impressed by people like Thomas à Kempis and Thomas Aquinas, men who we don't even really know who they are. We're not entirely sure in certain cases. This is the way things used to be. This kind of like I'm unique and sticking my name on everything, and it's all about me, and here's my Instagram account. This is very modern, and I think that saner men in the past again would look at us today and say these people have lost their minds, not to mention their souls. So yeah, I do get a lot of grief, but I also get enough. I don't need encouragement to carry on. It's nothing to do with that. But I look at actions. Do you know what I mean? At this point in everything, words are almost meaningless to me. If somebody, shows me by actions, then I take them seriously. And there are enough of those people to have allowed me to finish, stages of this work.
Okay, one question that I had before we move on to the second phase of your work, I want to talk about the revisitation that you went ahead and then you revised your translation.
Sure.
I don't know if revise is the right word, but you revisited the translation. We keep talking about the traditionalists, the people who who hold on to the Hadith literature and the Quran, the sort of like the mainstream Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, they were not happy with your findings. One of your findings that their religion is not in the Quran. But did they have any valid criticisms that you thought were worthy of note, or which spurred you onto your second phase, or you didn't really care for any of their criticisms?
It's not that I don't care about the criticisms. I've met decent Muslims, and what I see in Islamic culture and what I've seen of it is that there are, a lot of these concepts of faith and good works, they're just built into the waft and web of the culture. So, hospitality, all these things, these are parts of civilizational Islam. And I have no problem with any of that. I love, for example, some aspects of Islamic architecture and the way of not just mosques, but the way of building houses. And, there are many things that I like. So it's nothing to do with that. I don't... If you do this work, you create enemies, but I didn't go out looking for them. I have no real... For me... From where I'm coming from, they're just another version of what I've already seen in the West. There is no real opposition between them and what I saw in this sort of fake Christianity. I call it brand Islam because, to my mind, it is a brand. This is something that's been created quite recently. I mean, this understanding of things, this, that there's a whole story of it's a foundational myth on the basis of which this religion is presented in the West. And I'm not against it. I think it's nonsense, but I'm not out fighting it. I'm not David Wood or whatever his name is, who's, the sort of picking on Muslims all day long. I actually don't care about it. I don't care about it because I've got bigger problems right now, frankly. The ruling elite, who... when I started this work, I claimed were out to kill us all, and people go, "Oh, Sam's lost his mind." Well, not so much anymore, eh? So they're just. There's a queue of people lining up to try and kill me. Just get to the back of it and wait your turn.
But that's true, and I think with a lot of people, when they think about Islam, they think about this monolithic, religion that's been passed down over centuries, but if you actually dig into the text and look at some of the works, that there has been many differences, and it has evolved over time. It's almost like a chimera where there's different parts of it that were bolted on and then taken off, and this will continue down the line. This is standard practice for all religions. Sure. Whereas the Quran is solid. It's built on in the Quran we read that it's that who stands his house on a firm foundation versus someone who stands his house on a slippery slope, which you think has more stability. So that's where what we find with the Quran if we just hold on to the Quran. Now, so I wanted to talk a little bit about your revised translation. You first came out with the original translation, which you worked on, which obviously had the pan-textual analysis and the key definitions of terms. Everything was already in there. Sure. But then you decided to revisit that translation. Yeah. What was the reason for that?
I wasn't happy with it.
What reasons?
Well, I mean, firstly, I was physically ill over much of that period and wasn't entirely sure how long things might continue. So I was quite focused on finishing. But having finished, I thought that I could do better. There's an interview with Muhammad Assad, whom I've got a lot of time for. And he was an elderly man in this interview and living, I think he'd been part of the sort of the creation of Pakistan, and I think he'd been, in my view, pretty naive. But once reality began to bite, he sort of went and lived in Andalusia in southern Spain, saw out his days there. He was interviewed and he said, he was asked about his translation, and I could see in him this he knew that he could do better, but he just hadn't got the time to do it. And it was a combination of just this 1 second in this interview, just the cut of his eye. You can see that I just thought, well, if I've got time, I'm going to do it. So it was really Muhammad Assad, but also contrary to popular belief, I do not download truth by the gigabyte from the heavens. I'm actually a student. This is all I ever claimed to be, a student of this book. And I just learnt some new stuff in the meantime. That's the answer.
Okay. I think one of the things that you did in your second translation that made it more robust, if you will, is that you went through the other translators and picked apart their translations to kind of give the reader the view, the worldview, if you will, between the Sufi versus the sort of the strict Sunni interpretation, and how they all stack up. Because I think a lot of people, when they read the Quran, they just read one translation and they think that's all there is to it. But obviously, words have nuances, and the context is important. And
also to identify what certain translators are doing at certain points. And it's a bit like Jehovah's Witness. I have a thing about Jehovah's, as I've mentioned. As some people play golf or mahjong. I to relax, I study cults. I don't exactly know why, but I actually find it very relaxing, bizarrely. But anyway, Jehovah's Witness. Yes, in my dealings with Jehovah's Witness, they can appear to make an argument that stands firm, as a bit like the Western media, as long as you don't have either really a brain, but more importantly, any memory.
Sure.
And it's each, the question and answer. This is the question. Here's the answer. But that only works as long as you take those answers and questions and answers in isolation. The second you actually start to join them, well, if A, B, and C, if we're agreeing, then D doesn't go. It cannot. It just doesn't. If it's round and red and heavy, it cannot also be square. Okay, it can't be, because of what we've already agreed. Sure. So that's what I did with the translations. I also, to be fair, cited the translations where they got things right or were able to offer aspects that, because I can only choose one word at a time, I was actually limited. I would provide other parts of translations where I thought, especially Arbery and Sahih International as well, in places did a really good job. And even our sort of backpack carrying friend Silali and Khan, on some parts of grammar, they really got it right, and I give them the credit for that. So it's not just I'm here to show why I'm right and they're wrong. What I'm really doing is building upon the work that they've done, even if some parts of it I don't really agree with, and also to say, like, look, this is what they're doing here. They're using, because this isn't accessible to someone who doesn't have the Arabic. Sahih International, whoever it is, in this case is translating salawat, which it translates as prayers in every other case except about 3, as Jewish synagogues. Did you know that? You should know that. If you need to know that, because that exposes. I'm not saying that they're necessarily kind of conspiring, but them's the facts. So that's why I did it, and it was a lot of work, and as it all is, but I think it had value, and so I'm again with Muhammad Assad. Of course, are there things I could ever polish here and polish there? Sure, but I'm happy with it in the sense that, not because I think it's the best translation in terms of its language. It's not. It's a very rigid translation where I've aimed for consistency, and not only aimed for it, I've documented it. Does the language flow suffer as a result in some places? Sure. If you want nice language flow, read Abdul Yusuf Ali's translation. It flows great. But does it do what this one does? No, it doesn't. I agree.
Fair enough. So when you were doing this, completing your revised translation,
sure.
You then shifted your focus on completing your next 2 books, The Mysterious Letters of the Quran, A Complete Solution, and The God Protocol.
Yep.
Now, can you give us an overview on these 2 works?
Sure. It wasn't so much that I set out to write either of them. Deal with the Mysterious Letters first. Long conversations with my wife, this is going back 10 years now. I said, you know, she said, you'll work it out. I said, no, don't be ridiculous. You know, anyway, I said, you know, I know I'm, you know, I'm not stupid and stuff, and I'm persistent, but, you know, let's stay within the realms of, you know, of sanity. So that wasn't even an aspiration, to be perfectly honest, at that point. But going to the God Protocol, what the God Protocol was I think that was really fundamentally part of the motivation for the whole thing, is because I realized, you know, a long time ago that the elites are out to kill us. I mean, I'm sorry if that's shocking to anybody out there, but you know, this cattle truck, it's not going to a Club Med 30 holiday. It really isn't. This cattle truck's going to the abattoir. And even if these people weren't out trying to kill you, in fact, they require that you agree to do it yourself, you can die anyway. Nobody's got out, you know. Life is what it is. No one gets out alive, you know. It just is that. But given all of this, and given, you see, for me, seeing what's happening, it's quite clear that the ruling elites, I mean, they tell you that, you know, we live in a democracy, or whatever they mean by that, which I'm actually against democracy, but I won't get into that actual thing right now. But they tell you that, you know, your opinion counts and all this stuff, but quite clearly it doesn't. And anyway, people don't own their own minds. We've had this proven to us over the last, you know, twice in the last 5 or 6 years, once with COVID and now with Ukraine. People's minds not their own. They literally are. It's not that they're stupid, it's that they're weak, okay? It's just that they are, what they want is to be healthy, happy, safe, and to belong, and for it not to cost them any effort. That's what they want. They want 5 basically mutually exclusive things, and they can't have them. That's just the fact of it. So they also think that they're immune. You know, we see the killing fields of Cambodia, or the trenches of the First World War. They think that's never going to happen to me, but it will. You know, they will kill you. They don't care about you. They don't care about you. They have no favorites. It doesn't matter if you're British or, you know, American or Israeli or whoever it is. They will take you out. They have no favorites. And also the idea is popular amongst a lot of people is, you know, enough people are going to wake up and it's all going to change for the better, and that somehow they're going to be able to replace the ruling elites with something that works better. This is all nonsense. What I did, going back to the God Protocol, was the future is of a slave caste, okay, who are even stupider than they are now, and completely wired into some transhumanist thing where their minds are even less their own than they are now. Okay, it's a horror story beyond belief. And so what I did was I sat down and thought, rather than sort of screaming at passing cars from under from an underpass somewhere, you know, in the sort of Alex Jones style, you know, especially trying to convince people whose minds literally are not their own anyway. I'm not going to be able to impact that. I have limited resources. How can I use my very limited resources? It's about leverage, basically. So as little as possible in and as much possible out. How do you overthrow a globalist elite of psychopathic, satanist, child-killing bad people? Okay, I mean, just to kind of summarize. Well, what you do is you look at what worked before. Always go to the past. And the Quran is, and I couldn't get this from Muslims. They couldn't understand that this book is basically a cookery book on how to overthrow elites. You know, he's a warner. Muhammad is a warner. I'm warning like that. Previous warners. I never met a single Muslim ever gets this. No, apparently Muhammad is out there pushing a religion called Islam. But no, according to the Quran, none of that is there. What he is a warner. Sure. Like the previous warners. So what I did was I collated using the same methodologies or developments thereon of the work that I previously done with pan-textual analysis and definitions and all the rest of it, and synthesized a protocol. There's a protocol of how elites are overthrown, and distilled that, identified it on the basis of the Quran, and executed on it. And all of that information and the accounting of that process is in that book, which people can download, as with all of my work, for free. And the thing is about the ruling elites is that, and some people understand this, is that they always warn you. They always warn you. And they tell you ahead of time what they're going to do. And people get all very nervous and all very sort of emotional about it. But nobody stops to think, well, why do they do that? They do that because they understand that this is a requirement. You know, the fabric of God's universe requires this. That's why they warn you. And yet, no one ever does it to them. Why not? Why we just sitting there and complaining about how, you know, oh, they're doing this to us, oh, they're doing that to us, but not actually applying your mind to the actual problem. Or you have these problems given to you, which is, you know, Alex Jones. I respect Alex Jones, but you know, trying to go back to the glory days of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, it isn't going to happen. You know, things have moved on.
Sure.
The Quran, however, claims to be for all time. This is all I've ever done is just take it as its own word and test it on that basis. So the God Protocol isn't really a book. It is a warning to the ruling elite based on the Quran that other people can read, and that's what they do to us. When they're going to set up Agenda 35, 31 or Agenda 30, 25, whatever it is, they have a whole website with all that information on there. It's couched in this very particular language, but they're telling you exactly what they're going to do and when they're going to do it to you. Now, the fact that you don't read it, that's on you. So, sure. having done this, we then I needed to be able to prove that they'd received it. So it's there for them to download. There's a site, warningtotheelite.org, and that basically catalogues over 900, I think it's like 1,000 people in the ruling elites. I mean the real ruling elites. And we sent 1,000 letters to them by recorded delivery. They signed for them. They signed. We just applied exactly what they do to us to them. And the reason that I did it is because I see where they're going. And frankly, for me, Armageddon is a win. Given the alternative, what these people have got planned for us, I'm sorry if people can't grasp it, but if you want to, just cast your mind back 30 years, if you still have one, and just consider, what it was like growing up 30 years ago and what it's like growing up now, where your children are indoctrinated into the wonders of essentially pedophilia. You think that's going to stop? One thing I've learned about the ruling elites is they never stop. They never, ever, 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 ever stop. Ever, not ever. And the only time they ever stop is when there's a cataclysm. And that's essentially what the God Protocol outlines and not only legitimizes but legalizes, gives a legal framework. And this goes back to your question about the revision of my first work. There has to be, the Quran itself is a legal basis upon which the God Protocol stands. And so that's how it works. Some mad English guy writing this book of warning, the elites. Yeah, okay, crazy guy, fine. But I'm not doing this in my own name. I'm not doing it because I'm such an intelligent guy and so interesting. No, I'm doing it on the basis of this book. This is the legal framework. These people are legalists. That's what I've done, is just apply a legal approach to that. And so really for me, it's a kind of almost like a triumvirate. We have the Quran as the legal basis. We have the God Protocol as the warning mechanism, detonation mechanism. And then to get to your other point about the mysterious letters of the Quran, that's the proof. In these three things together, they can take them, they can ignore them. I don't care. I've turned into the guy in the Islamic bookshop in Kilburn High Street. I don't care. I'm just doing my job. And that's the way I see it. It doesn't depend on me. I'm just a student of this book. I'm just able to understand that when it says this is how you make raspberry flan or Victoria sponge cake, I just made Victoria sponge cake. It doesn't mean that I am Victoria sponge cake or I'm the genius who invented Victoria sponge cake. No, I just when a book says to me, this is a cookery book on how to make Victoria sponge cake, and then I make Victoria sponge cake, it doesn't mean that I'm so great. It just means I can follow some elementary instructions.
This legalistic viewpoint that you brought up, I think it's very apt, because we read in the Quran, you know, with the exchange between God and this entity, Satan, the adversary,
Sure.
as you have correctly alluded to. He makes the exchange is him asking permission to do, you know, to corrupt. And it's interesting that he first sets up this whole legal contract, if you will,
Yes.
and then he then proceeds to, you know, go ahead with his plan. And he says, respite me, and God says, you're respited. And the whole idea is that do what you can, and you won't be seized until the day of judgment. So the people who are at the top, the elites, they are also a satanic cult, if you will. They are, you know, followers of Satan. They're party of Satan. That's what the Quran calls them.
Absolutely.
You talked about the mechanism of the Quran, the God protocol, and you alluded to Armageddon. What exactly do you mean by that? Is this protocol designed to initiate the final eschaton, the judgment, or is it something that once it's implemented, they have a chance to reverse course?
Yeah, they have a chance, but it's never happened before, except in the case of Jonah. In all other cases, when this mechanism of warning was implemented, they rejected and were destroyed. What it means is that the warnings of God become binding upon them at this point. It's a bit like if you have the Miranda rights read to you, the Miranda laws in America. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will, all of that can be used against you in a court of law. The only smart thing to do after that is to shut up. Because there's nothing you can say that's going to do anything except incriminate you. But it's a change in legal status. It's a declaration after which your status has been changed. In fact, cases get thrown out all the time because the police forgot to do that. Well, then anything that was said doesn't count. The elites, the way that law works is that silence connotes consent. Silence connotes consent. So when you don't burn the schools down because they're teaching your children to become pedophiles, or, you know, to allow themselves to be abused, which is essentially what's going on in Western schools now, or whatever it is, that's on you. Or when you agree to take to roll up your sleeves and have something injected into you, because they've told you that this is the right thing to do, and you want to be liked, you want to belong, you want to be safe, all of those things. Everyone else is doing it. It's on you. You died. It's on you. On you.
There was no coercion. That's true.
This is how they work. This is how they work, and they have to work this way. I mean, obviously they achieved other things. I mean, we're getting into another realm, but, you know, they managed to get rid of all the good police, the good nurses, all of those people, and replace them with more mediocrities, midwits, and supine obedience freaks, so that when they bring the next one out, it's going to be tougher. But essentially, on a Quranic basis, at least, the Satan says, "I called, you followed. I am quit of thee." This is a legal thing. They have to offer you the opportunity to jump off the cliff onto the rocks below. Why are they like this? They're like this for a reason. They like it for a reason. They need plausible deniability, and by your compliance, you supply them with that. What this does, what the God protocol does, is it short circuits all of that. And after that, it doesn't mean that Quranically, I am with you waiting. So wait, the Quranic position is that I have no idea, but I do know that after this, it can happen. It can happen because they have been warned. Whether it happens today, next week, 10 years, 20 years, I have no idea. I'm not a prophet. I'm a student of this book. And all I've done is say, okay, you know, this is how you make Victoria sponge cake. I just made Victoria sponge cake. I have no special insights.
Fair enough. And I also wanted to, I guess, for the viewers, I think it's interesting to remember that Brother Gerrans' work, he also demonstrates that the elites, they are part of a satanic cult, and that it's not that they are atheistic in the sense we understand that they don't have a religion. They actually do have a religion, and if you read the Quran, you see that it's talking about the party of Satan, the forces of Satan. So this is literally what it's talking about. So it gives you more of something to chew upon when you read the Quran, that it's actually describing the world we live in, and this world has been like this for a long, long time. It's nothing new, as they say, nothing new under the sun. So this was something that I didn't know. When I approached Brother Gerrans' work, I realized that the elites were actually legalistic, and they had their own morality. They have their own code, which you might not agree with, but they have morals, and that's what they do, why they do it.
Yep, they do, and they're not like you imagine. They don't go home and they don't think, oh, how could I turn into such a terrible evil person? They don't see it in those terms. They don't think any more of you or care any more of you than you care or think about what you had to eat for lunch 3 months ago. That's it. And they would regard you as, they would regard anybody who thought otherwise as being essentially stupid.
Sure. Okay, so let's move on to, now that we're finished with your second phase of the work, then right now you are also working on something. This is a new phase of your work, if you will.
Yes.
And I wanted to talk about that a little bit, give the audience a little bit of an overview of what you are doing, what you're planning to do, and why the reasons behind you doing it.
I think that there's a bit in a film. What's it? What Women Want. There's this wonderful line in this film. The main character can hear what women want, what women are thinking, and he's talking to one of his co-workers, and the chap himself, he's really flustered about it. He thinks he might die, and the new boss is starting work that day, and they all have to go to this meeting, and his friend says, well, can we walk and talk, because just in case you don't die, I don't want to be late. Well, what's kind of happened with me is that I continued being alive, and I could conceivably go and do something else, and was prepared to do that, and said as much on my YouTube channel, because I thought, well, the important things have been done, and I'm not naive. I understand how the world works, and okay, fine. Excuse me. But a couple of people have come forward, and they're helping me to pay the bills, which is what boils down to, because I know everything in internet world is, everyone thinks it's all free, and it just doesn't require anything, but actually there's work behind everything that people see. There's work behind it, and some people have sort of said, no, we'd like to help you, at least do another project or whatever. And so I am, and I mean, what I'm doing in this, there are a couple parts of it. Excuse me for coughing. One is I think there's place for a short collection of thoughts which are something like what Thomas à Kempis achieved with his Imitation of Christ, but for believers initially at least for believers in the Quran, but not exclusively. One which is accessible and something that I myself would like to read as part of my devotion. So I'm putting that together slowly. It's not something you can just sit down and run off. It's something that has to sort of correlate with your life as you're living it. So that's on my Substack. But the main part of it, obviously, I still make videos every now and then, and videos, as you know, they take time. People think they don't, but they actually do. Preparation and so on. But the kind of the core of my intellectual work at the moment is really understanding what the Quran, how the Quran stands in relation to previous scriptures. Now, my thinking on this is not complete, so I can't give you a final idea of it. But the way it works is that critics of the Quran seem to have caught people on a double-pronged fork. See if I can get this right. The way it works is that, well, the Quran is like previous scriptures. Therefore, it's been taken from those scriptures. Therefore, it's fake. But then they say, but the Quran is also not like these other scriptures. Therefore, it's wrong. Well, which is it? Is it wrong or is it fake? But it's kind of both. It's going back to our good friends at Jehovah's Witness, question A, question B, question C. Okay, they all seem fairly plausible, but question D, that you can't have all of them. They don't go. It's a 2-meter blanket on a 3-meter bed. Let's just, So what I'm doing is looking at that in quite a methodical way. And I'm not going into it with conclusions. I don't have any. But I've recently completed what I consider to be a major piece of work. It's just under 7,500 word essay on what the Quran means by the children of Israel, and that's on my Substack as well. It automatically opens up to everybody after a week or something. It doesn't matter. But in that work, you have to before you kind of compare text with text, we have to be clear on what the Quran actually means. Otherwise, you end up by having other people's definitions thrust upon you, and especially with the question of who or what the children of Israel are. Well, this is a very thorny question. But when I started that, I didn't actually have a complete answer, although I had a lot of reservations about some of the more politicized answers ones given today. But now I have an absolute answer. So that's one block. And I hope to do the same thing for other key personalities, if you want to call it that, in the Quran. So we start with some Quranic definitions. Thereafter, I will go through and make a systematic comparison between the Quranic text and other texts. What's interesting is, if we just take what I can speak to at the moment, which is the children of Israel, what you find with the Quran is interesting is what you don't find. The name Israel, outside of the context of the formulation children of Israel, only occurs twice in the Quran as a single word, as a standalone word. Nowhere in the Quran is Jacob specifically identified with Israel, and nowhere is he called Israel in a context in which you would understand that that's who's meant. Nowhere in the Quran do we find the incident we find in Genesis, is it 32, where Jacob wrestles the angel and is thereafter named Israel. Not there. Nowhere do we find in the Quran any the other kind of key name change moment, which is when Abram becomes Abraham. Not there. Or where Sarai becomes Sarah. Not there. Nowhere is any of the sons of Jacob named other than Joseph. And so what you find is that the Quran's emphasis is entirely different to that of the Hebrew scriptures, and it's entirely different. Another point which I hadn't noticed but I now know, for example, famously you have the rivalry between Esau and Jacob, the two sons of Isaac. Esau is nowhere mentioned in the Quran, not even, there's no allusion to him, you couldn't even derive him from any of its contents. These are interesting things, and so I'm really at the moment just gathering, I'm putting some meat on some ill-defined and not completely gathered bones, but it's an interesting thing, because what I want there to be is a single repository, so that when these accusations are made, the Quran is just like, the former scriptures, or it's corollary, the Quran is different to the former scriptures. In both cases, it's being wrong. We can actually, somewhere people can go and say, what specifically are we talking about, and then pull up some data. Is going back to this, A, B, C, and D thing. And it's to make it easy. And I understand, very few people are going to care about these things, but for those people who do, so that there should be somewhere where they can quickly get to that, and they can access that information and come to their own view. Is this accusation valid or not valid? Because people now have what I call factoids. They know a little tiny snippet that they picked up from, Richard Dawkins or whoever it is, and that's their entire view now. The Quran is very clear. It says that they've rejected the Quran without having understood even a tenth of it. It doesn't say they did understand a tenth of it. They say they didn't even understand a tenth of it. I work on the view that I don't care about numbers. I'm an anti-democratic individual. I have no interest in masses. I have no interest. I'm a medieval man. I believe in quality. So I'm writing for the few. That's it. That's it. That's it for me. I only care about them. And amongst, the billions of people who are alive, all of whom are supposed to be so significant, actually, to my mind, to my way of thinking, there's actually a very small group of people for whom I actually have any real time. And the Quran itself, it says that, I will fill hell with men and jinn altogether. And the mass of men, if you follow the mass of men, the mass is this whole idea, and I'm sort of sliding off on a tangent, but who is it, do you think, gave you the idea that the majority is right? I mean, it's the media owned by 0.0000001% of the population who bang this idea into the minds of the drones daily, that they're so important and that the numbers are the only thing that matters. That's not my experience. And the men of quality of the past would have found this entire proposition ridiculous, and I do too. So I only really care about the few. And that's who I'm working for.
And the Quran obviously says the same thing when it says you follow the majority, they will lead you astray. So this whole idea of democracy right off the bat is ridiculous because the majority is wrong. And
yeah.
so
by definition, they're wrong. A priori, they're wrong. If you find yourself in the majority, you should take a very hard look in the mirror and question your premises.
Sure, understood. Okay, so moving on, I have a question here. It's something that I've been thinking about. Obviously, you have put in a tremendous amount of intellectual and financial capital into serving God and to doing the work that you're doing. What would your advice be for fellow believers who are similarly committed to serving the Almighty and pleasing Him?
Who are as committed or who are not?
Who are similarly committed, who are looking for, for serving God.
I would say you got to look to your. I don't want to kind of box myself into those sort of cliches like your passion and stuff. It's not that. I would start with death. Death is always a good one. You can't go wrong. You're going to meet it. It's a fixed. It's a constant. So I would start with that. If you were going to die tomorrow, right? What is it that you'd wish you'd done for God? All right, then give yourself another 5 years and act accordingly. That's kind of it. I think people will find their thing by looking at what they already know. Not everybody does what anybody else can do. I mean, there are people who do all kinds of things in life I couldn't hope to do. I can't remember what the price of bread is. I can't hold that information in my head. I can't. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things that I'm just really, really useless at, and so I don't concentrate on those things. Play to your forehand. Play to your strong suit. My own view of what I've learned about myself over this period is, I think that I'm multi-talented, but mediocre in a lot of quite interesting overlapping ways. So if you're going to take talent as like a magnifying glass, I've got a whole load of quite weak, completely unimpressive magnifying glasses, but they overlap in this way so that there's a kind of a core that eventually runs through them. I'm not saying I'm terrible at all kinds of things. I'm actually quite talented at quite a few things, but I'm actually under par on a whole load of things. But they just kind of overlap in such a way that when the light comes through, there's this very thin core in which I'm razor focused, and I know that I am. And so I concentrate on that. I don't go looking for, some area where I'm not ever going to be any good. So I think a clue is what you already know and what you already like. Those would be good clues. A chap said to me once, about 25 years ago, he had a few years on me, he was about 10 years older than me. He said, you know what? He says, there comes a point in life where you can't reinvent yourself. You're going to be boxed in by whatever decisions you've made. So my background was in public relations. It's unpicking ideology, religion, which I'd experienced, languages, all of those things. So I kind of, this phase was built on those things. Now, if I'd had backgrounds in, caring for old people or, playing rugby, let's say, my decisions would have been different. So I would say that it requires brutal truth. This, no one else can tell this to you. But also, I would fight shy of the this ideology which is current today, which is firstly that nothing worth knowing or everything worth knowing can be acquired. If you can't acquire it by some means of fun, then it's not worth having. No, that's not true. And if you want to, it's work. It is work. And the other thing is, I think genius is overrated. If you have a choice between genius and discipline, and it's an either or, I mean, if you've got genius, take it with you. But if it's an either or, then go with this discipline, because discipline will get things done. And also, you have to kind of be prepared to be misunderstood. There's no way out of that. People are not going to understand. If you want to serve God, would you really go and ask people who are serving the Satan all day long for advice? No, you wouldn't. So if you don't know anybody like that, then really you're going to have to stick with your own gut. So there is an element of heroism in any case. But ultimately you have to choose whom you will serve. I think, Jesus says it best in the Gospels. You cannot serve God and mammon. You can't do it. For you're either hate the one and serve the other, or hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both. It's impossible. It's water and oil. So make a choice and accept the consequences, whichever way you go.
Sure. You are a student of the Quran, as I am a student of the Quran, and there's other students as well. Obviously, you have meditated on it. What would you say is the Quran's underlying message?
To fear God, serve Him, and prepare for the day of judgment.
All right. And I also have a little bit of, a little bit of, outro here about Brother Gerrans. You can check out his website. It's QUR'AN.com. And he has another website based on his name, samgerrans.com. And samgerrans.com, I understand, is sort of a running tally of all the works that you have done.
Yeah,
and QUR'AN.com is more focused towards the Quran, the 3 works that you've written, and the reader website, which is basically an online tool that you can use to study the Quran and also verify a lot of the things that Brother Gerrans has done. His pan-textual methodology, that's also easily, you can verify that by using the tools on the website.
Sure. If anybody goes to samgerrans.com or just looks me up, they'll find it. On the front page, they'll get to my Substack, or they can, if they look at books, it'll lead to QUR'AN.com. They're easy to find. My Substack is where I produce, where I publish written work, and also my YouTube channel, which people can find there. So you can basically get as much Sam Gerrans as you can stomach, but it's all there. It's all free. Just jump in and.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention Brother Gerrans has read the whole of the Quran, the translation in audio format. You can go on his website, QUR'AN.com, and download it in MP3 format, so you can have that with you.
Yeah, if I could just say, that is really for download. It's not, that isn't an audio server. So if people try to play it and listen to it there, that's not a good idea. Just download whatever it is, 2 gigabytes, and then you've got it.
Of course. Now, also, I wanted to ask you. You mentioned, some people have stepped up and helping you out financially. What would be the best way to, contribute to your project financially? I know you're in Russia, so it's difficult to move funds over there.
No. It's okay. I mean, there's on my QUR'AN site, or there's a contribute page, and people can find it there. That helps, of course. But honestly, I mean, above a certain point, it's not really a money issue for me. I want to complete a task, so that's what it is. So if people want to help the truth of the matter is 98% of people are never going to help. But the good thing is when people aren't a hindrance, it's just, they're not just sending me questions that I've answered in other places. I don't respond to all of that stuff. I don't have time. I'm not running I'm not running a therapy session for anonymous people who want to, and then you have to deal with trolls and bots and all the rest of it. So I just don't respond to any of that. But I have a couple of people who, they don't financially help at all, but they help me out with, I suppose, what you might call intern tasks, stuff like that. That's really useful. It's fantastic because it frees me up to get on with some other stuff. So it isn't only or even primarily about money. People who, they can just share my work or send it to people who, people I think are quite afraid, to be honest with you, to share my work. They come from Islamic backgrounds and so on. But a good way to do it is maybe buy a book or two and give them to friends and say, tell me what you think of that. That might be a way of doing it. So there are things like that, and people can buy the books there. But I didn't start this. Believe me, there are better ways. There are more financially lucrative and optimal ways of making a living other than sending a hand grenade into the hornet's nest of the Islamic world. Believe me, they just exist. That wasn't the motivation. My motivation, obviously I have to keep body and soul together as we all do, and I understand that it's getting tougher for everybody. It's getting tougher for us too. It is. But for me, I want the garden. And I'm non-negotiable on this point. That's what I really want. And so that's it. But if people want to help, they can help in that way. But I'm not a good person to write to if you think I'm going to sort of adopt you as a sort of personal pet project or something, to field your questions on whether it's possible to get married over Skype or all that kind of stuff. No, it just goes in the people who won't use the search engine box.
Well, and it actually, a lot of questions have already been answered by the work you put out. So it's really a matter of reading. And then Brother Gerrans' YouTube channel, your channel is a great resource for people who have questions.
Sure.
I know in the initial sort of phase that you were on, you had a lot of answers to the questions that Muslims usually ask, zakat, salat, what does it mean, etc., etc. So everything is out there. Obviously, you need to put in the time to research stuff, but that's it's not worth bugging someone over that. So that's fine. Let's see what else. Okay, so your books are available on your website. So definitely, it's like you said, it's not about the money, but it's good to have a paperback, hard copy version.
I buy books because I think for one thing, you can stop things going down the memory hole. So there's that. You can get them on Amazon and stuff. Amazon just takes all of your money. It's actually better for me to sell them at 10% less myself, and than they sell on Amazon. But that's what I do. But if you can't, you've got a printer. Download it, print it off. Just if you want to read that,
is available.
Yeah,
and then obviously the website reader.QUR'AN.com also, it's a mobile friendly, so you can use that as well.
Absolutely, so, and I want to hit that point because Saeed, you put that together, and based on this work, the reader.QUR'ANite.com, which you can get to from QUR'ANite.com, it's up in the top menu bar. Not only do lots of other people use it all the time, I use it all the time. It's an incredible tool. It's not just Sam Gerrans' translation, or even just comparing Sam Gerrans' translation with other translations. If you're studying Arabic, if you want to get into the Arabic of the Quran and you want to save yourself a world of pain and a ton of time, then use it. It's really useful. You can search by root. You can, at a click of a button, you can be at a whole slew of dictionaries at the right page. If you've learned Arabic and understand how the root system works and have spent time learning how to use even an Arabic dictionary, you will appreciate that this is a major labor saving device. Even if you don't agree with any of the rest of it, you can use it on that basis. And it's not draped in advertising. It's just it's there as a resource.
Yeah, that's how it's designed. That's it. I really appreciate you, Brother Gerrans, coming here and answering my questions. I think this will be really helpful for people who are not introduced to your work, and also people who have heard of you but haven't really had a chance to look into your work. I would suggest again highly that you go on Brother Gerrans' websites and download his work and read up on it. It takes a lot of effort, but it's worth it. It's worth the time you put into it, and God willing, you will get a lot from it. May God reward you, Brother Gerrans, for your efforts in this life and the hereafter.
God willing.
And that's it for now. Until next time, peace and blessings be upon you.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate taking the time to ask me these questions. And anyone who's made it to the end, I think they should have a cheat code of some kind. I think they deserve a prize. But anyway, I appreciate it. And thanks for asking me.